share how you're feeling today.
So yes, it's 7 o'clock, and as usual, we like to get started on time. So today we are very excited about this session, and all these sessions are. Firstly, we would like to say, a small way for us to connect with all of you. During this time, just to stay in touch and everything. So today, the session that we have is we are really excited for it. It's about what's a man, masculinity in India. Just
Sorry,
give
I
us
think
one
we're
second.
getting some
Yes.
background noise today. Oh, 1 second. I'm muting everyone again.
Yes. Yes. So in this session today, we are going to talk about what's a man, masculinity in India, which is a big subject, and something that we always talk about women, what women should be doing, maybe to empower women, what we should be doing, and everything. We hardly ever think about addressing men as well every time. So today we have with us Dr. Deepa Narayan. She's an award-winning author of Chup and a TEDx speaker, and she is a thought leader with Sipping Thought. She has been with on our platform before. We have discussed her book as well, and we have got the chance to honor her with on our Women's Day event that we had, as 21 women in 2021 for her, contributions and the things that she has been doing for women in society. So in this session, we are going to discuss about Deepa Narayan's new podcast, which is What's a Man, and what it means actually to be a man in today's time. And this session right now during pandemic is even more important because women we know are reeling under pressure and patriarchy and the closed environment, with lockdown and everything. And we all know about these stats that, the mental pressure and all women are going through. But what about the other half? How can we leave out the other half when we are talking about gender equality? So let me introduce you to this special guest, Dr. Deepa Narayan. She is the author of groundbreaking book Chup, Breaking the Silence About India's Women. She is the founder of Chup Circles. She is the creator and host of What's a Man podcast. She was the former senior advisor at the World Bank in Washington D.C. and she wrote the influential series Voices of the Poor. She has written around 15 books and is recipient of so many awards, and she has been counted in list as global thinker and all. So without further ado, let's jump into this session, and let me hand it over to Sukirti ma'am to start it. She's the co-founder of our platform. So ma'am, please go ahead.
So, first of all, Deepa, welcome to Sipping Thoughts. So glad to have you back here.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure. And as I said before we started, it's an act of courage to continue your sessions at this very difficult time in
But we
India.
thank
And
you
thank
also
you,
because you
everyone, for
are
joining.
actually in Seattle and it's a very, very early morning for you over there.
Mhm. True.
But I'd like to kick it off, Deepa, because we all know about your book, Chup, and we know that you've done a lot of work on women and talking about women and why they are silenced. But why this project? Why did you want to talk about men? Because a lot of people already feel they're the privileged lot.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's the obvious first question. Um, I've worked on issues around poverty all my life and gender equality and understanding men's and women's perspectives was a part of this. But as I thought more, it seems that in our quest for women's empowerment, we've completely bypassed the men. And just as we argued that women are half the population, and that given, particularly in India, the state of society, we need to focus and uplift women, I feel very strongly that if you ignore the other half of the population, which is men, that you cannot have women's empowerment. That's one. The second is in any society for harmony, there have to be people across all genders, which include men and women, to be happy in uh, have to be happy, content, and working with each other. And if you don't include men who hold the power by and large in society at this time, there is no way that you can have women's empowerment that is sustainable over time without a backlash. And so I felt it's really important to understand men in their own terms, without judgment, without preconceptions, just in the way that I undertook understanding women about 7 years ago. And I had promised myself as well as the men that I would come back to explore with them what masculinity means to them.
So,
I want to say a couple of
oh, go ahead.
may I
Go
say,
ahead.
may I say a couple of things that are important is that the explorations I do, there are two things that distinguish it. One is that it's open-ended. So I'm not going in as a masculinity expert. I'm going there as a humble learner from men about what their lives are like, what bothers them, what's working in their lives, without any preconceptions. So it's a journey for me in learning. That's really important. The second is that it's very non-judgmental. So I'm a good listener when I'm doing research, and I train my team to be good listeners, which means that men then are willing to talk. And it's from that engagement of compassionate listening without judgment that the truth comes stumbling out. So, just like with women, no man said, I'm tired, I want to stop the interview, right? They were as relieved as women in being able to talk honestly about their lives an environment where they felt safe to be heard. So that's all it is just to listening to them and learning from them what it means to be a man today.
Can you tell us, Deepa, a little bit more about your research? Because you are such a scientifically oriented person and you've gone very deep into the subject.
Right. Um, I mean, I've done a lot of quantitative research, but I like to do research where I feel we don't have answers. So, in a sense, it's easier, but in a sense, it's more difficult because you have to be able to tolerate uncertainty. You really don't know what you're going to find. So, for this research, we ask open ended questions. And then the first question we ask, and maybe it'll be nice at this point to ask everyone this question. So, answer it honestly without thinking too much and just write your responses, the first things that come to your mind into chat. Is that all right? If you just raise your thumb if you're willing to participate. Fantastic. So here's the question. And it's for men and for women. Think about the men that you know. Even again, the first response. What are the first three words that you come to your mind when you think of a man? What are the first three words that come to your mind when you think of a man? And don't be appropriate. Don't worry about this is right or wrong. Just be honest and write it down. Post it on chat.
Wow. Susmita says
Just,
inequality.
just, just, no, just don't talk about it
Okay.
yet, Sukriti. Let's just give them a minute. Just keep writing, everyone. And remember, this is non-judgmental, okay? So just, I don't want to hear any judgmental comments. I'll stop you. That includes you, Sukriti. So let's create this space for this next hour or however long we are together so we can speak and listen without judging each other. Can we have that agreement? So when someone speaks, no interruption and no judgment. So let's see if we can create just for this 1 hour deep listening, which means no interruption, no jumping in and interrupting the other person, and no defense, just listening. No arguments, no opinions. You can talk about your own experience, but no opinions. Is everyone done? If you're done, just again, just raise your, I can't see everyone. So if you're done, just let me ask you another question before discussing this one. One more question. Is that all right? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So the next one is, what are the first three words? People are still responding. So let's just wait. Let's just wait 30 seconds more. And thank you everyone for your willingness to respond. And we'll treat this as confidential, so no writing anywhere for anyone. We may have some journalists that this one said this and this one said that. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next question. And again, respond quickly without trying to be appropriate or politically correct. First response that comes to your mind. What are the first three words that come to your mind when you think of a woman? What are the first three words that come to your mind when you think of a woman? And post. Thank you all. Thank you for your responses. Thank you for participating. You can look at them and chat. So this is the power of an open-ended methodology. What you've written, if I was to ask you for your opinions, we would get into right or wrong very quickly and arguments about whose life is better and who's suffering more, or are men in the wrong or women in the wrong, but not all men, not all women, etc., etc. So, Sukriti, I interrupted you. How do you want to proceed?
Would you like me to read some of the responses? Or I think we can play the audio because that also is quite nice in the way that it
Okay.
gives.
So, just observe your responses and reflect on them because you know what you've written. And we'll come back to them a little bit. I want to play with to you. So this research is based on 250 in-depth interviews with boys mostly and men in Delhi, Mumbai, and some of the other large cities, including in places in Kerala. And then content analysis, which is we will literally go through and see what are the themes that come up. So I didn't start this research with um, any expectations of what I find. So the analysis takes a long time because you're going through very systematically and seeing what are the themes that come out, what are the issues, what are people saying, etc. And based on that, then we developed the podcast themes. Before I get into that, I just want to say two things that are important. One is that I focus on the educated, I would say highly educated, at least with first college degree, mostly many with masters, etc., middle and upper class men in the cities, and not poor people. Although most of my research has focused on poor people, this is about families like ours. This is about us. So the second thing is that I did a podcast because I wanted to engage in conversation, and writing a book takes a long time. And so I thought, well, first, because I want to engage and open up the conversation, I'll do the podcast first and then a book, because then the book can come. But the idea of getting the conversation going was to get it out quickly. So we asked this question that I just asked you of boys as young as 7 years old up to 50, and I want you to listen to their responses, some of their responses, just to give you a flavor of these are the kinds of responses we got. Please go ahead.
Man, listen to what they said.
Strong.
Strong?
Why strong?
Just comes in my mind.
Who is a man that you think is very strong?
My dad.
What makes him strong?
His courage.
Strong, fast, and intelligent.
Usually men are tall. When I see them, I feel like they are monsters.
First words that come to my mind for a man: responsibility.
Mostly dominance, assertion, and aggression.
Any word that comes to your mind.
My dad.
Short hair. लड़कों के छोटे बाल होते हैं.
Muscular, tall, beard, facial hairs.
I think it got disconnected. That's okay. So I think the tape got cut off. That's okay. So just to give you a flavor of it, and you can listen to any of these episodes from any of the platforms. And I think Sukriti was kind enough to send you the links. The basic point is that what we found in just asking this question of what does it mean, what are the words or images that come to your mind when you think of a man or a woman, 2 or 3 things that are striking, including in your responses, that there's almost no overlap between the descriptions or the qualities or the images that we have of men and that we have of women. And this is true among men too, right? So the way the boys, if 7-year-old describes, and I'm keep going back to the 7-year-old because they've already learned this, right? The way a 7-year-old or a 15 or a 20 or 30-year-old describes a man and a woman, there's no overlap. That's one. That's okay. We say, okay, men and women have different roles, so that maybe they have, but these are qualities, right? And so, and then the second is that when we ask them, do you want to be, do you prefer being a girl or a boy? All of them said, of course, a man or a boy. Why? Because a girl's life is very difficult and they don't have as much freedom and choice. So they're very aware. Second, that came out is even while they're aware of their privileges, they're not comfortable. Not all, but they're not comfortable with it because they feel it's not fair. But are they willing to give up their privilege? Not so sure. So the differences are all right, but it's the values that are put on the differences that are really problematic. So the training of a boy, if I was to summarize it, is not to be a girl. The training of a man is not to be a woman. So men are socialized not to act like women. And the qualities of a woman are ridiculed and devalued. So when we talk throughout the interviews that we had, whatever we talked about, whether it's about emotions, about the body, about voice, about power, what comes up consistently is don't act like a girl. So the devaluation of feminine or female qualities and the lifting up of very traditional, narrowly defined male qualities comes up, even though intellectually you don't believe in it. And that's important. So there's a big gap between how we think of ourselves and how our deep psyche reacts to situations. And that's where the problems come in. And the last thing I want to say on this is that these responses, and I'm sure all of you, all of us, we all believe now in gender equality. In fact, many of the kids, the 8-year-old boys would say, of course, because we had not just about equality, we had questions on very simple questions. And is there a difference between girls and boys? Who's more important? Are they equally important? Could both be equal? Are they equally good leaders? Are they equally powerful? Are they equal, etc.? And whether it was adults or kids, they not only talked about, of course, I mean, why are you being so old-fashioned? You shouldn't even be talking about a binary now. It's not gender, it's not men and women. It's across, there's a continuum. It's true, it is. We did interview people of different sexual orientations and gender orientations. But when it came to unpacking this, the inequality disappears, the notion of equality disappears very quickly. So that's what we need to come back to is, yes, we believe in gender equality, not to make fun of that. And now what? Well, how does it manifest or does it not manifest? And where's the gap between our intellectual beliefs and our everyday behaviors? So what the research does is to focus on our everyday behaviors because that's how we are, and that's what impacts our lives, whether we're at home, whether we're at work, whether we're in the marketplace, or whether we're with friends. So let me stop there. That was a long response.
So, there's a lot of food for thought that you've just given us. And this makes us wonder, that, talking about what it means to be a boy and a girl separately, there are a lot of stereotypes, gender-based stereotypes that we still see around us. The definition of what it means to be a man and woman, what we hear around us, is very narrow still. Okay, society's role, men don't cry, men have to be the primary breadwinners in the society, at home and all, and men have to be strong and all that. How do we change the stereotypes? Because even in 2021, in this era, we are still facing these kind of stereotypes, even in urban cities, tier 1 cities and metro cities, and even in most educated families, we are seeing this. So how do we bring that change?
Yeah, I think I want to come back to this question later. I think we're jumping too quickly into how do we change without first understanding how we are. Because I think the problem is that all of us, including myself, we believe we act in gender equal ways, but we don't. So I think we're part of the problem. And if you assume we're part of the problem, we may not be the biggest part of the problem, but we're still a part of the problem. Then I think there is greater compassion and less willingness to point fingers at others. So please remember that all these things that have come out is from families like ours. So we're all doing this because we're all cultural creatures, and all this learning goes into your head very early. So I may not be living in India right now, I may not be in India, but I bring my cultural baggage with me until I unlearn it, right? So we can unlearn it, and I think the most important thing to remember in this is this is just training. We've just been trained to believe like this, and it's not just parents, but although it starts in families, it's everywhere, as you said. It's in schools, it's in the media, it's everywhere, and it is possible to unlearn it, but it takes effort. And each one of us has to start with one thing, one gender stereotype that you don't want to that you want to break. And then it becomes even more powerful if you talk to your friends and colleagues and make collective promises or contracts. But start small, because we can't change everything in ourselves, even if you take everything else. You've got to pick it apart. So 7 years ago, after the Nirbhaya rape, I made one commitment to myself, which was if anyone put women down in a conversation, I would interrupt. And it was difficult to do. If you're talking to an army general and he says something, are you willing to say, no, you can't say this? Or if you're at a party, do you want to be the person who says, you can't make a sexist joke? If you start doing it, it starts changing. But it is, even these everyday little things are little acts of courage. Or with your partner, or with your kid. And then how can we do it in a way that, that changes and stick with it? So I would choose one behavior and start changing it. Clothing stores, whether it's in India or the US or in Ireland, are the same. So you go into a shop and you say you want to buy baby clothes. The first question is it for a girl or a boy? And they're still doing it, even in the US, by the way. So it's everywhere. And a lot of this, the research shows, is because businesses wanted to sell more, right? Because you have double the number of clothes if you have different clothes for girls and different clothes for boys. So every time you go into a store and you get asked this, Amazon, you go on Amazon, I wanted to order some toys for my granddaughter who's 3. And I wanted to order a truck. And it was all for boys. It was only in the boys section. And then the other remote controlled stuff, it was for girls and boys. So I chose something that was for girls and boys, just as my little protest. So it's very insidious. And so you have to decide where you want to make a start. And it could be something that's really life-changing. It could be everyday small behaviors, but everything makes a difference because slowly societal change then starts happening if we do it together. And this is what Chup Circles is about, which we can talk about separately, is how can we engage in conversation? Because the collective is stronger than the individual, because when you bring about change, there's natural opposition because you're disturbing the balance, disturbing the equilibrium, whether it's in the family or not. And by the way, that's why culturally, women are trained not to support each other. And it's wonderful to see the younger generation breaking this. And collectives like yours, Sukriti, that are breaking this is really powerful. because once again, you're going against the training. Because if women get united, then the systems will have to change, right?
One of the questions I definitely wanted to ask, and you've covered it quite a bit in your podcast also, is the equation of men and power. Can you speak about that? Because that is one of the ones that we do kind of feel that there is a disbalance in terms of the power equation.
Yeah, I think there are through this research, I actually wanted to follow two major concepts, two big ideas. One is power, and the other one is love. So let me first speak about power. Again, I used an open-ended approach and asked the boys as well as the men, what does power mean to you, and what is the image that comes from power? And I think there are two or three things that are important about this. This, by the way, is episode 2. And we've almost reached 250,000 listens, which is huge for an episode. And so it's thanks to all of you that the numbers are going up. One of the most listened to episodes is number 2, which is about power. In the open-ended, because of the open-ended questions, what emerges is power is dominance, aggression, and control over others. Power also is seen as very muscular. It's strong, it's strength. So a 7-year-old boy said, if I'm not strong, meaning physically strong, if I'm not muscular, if I can't lift up weights, I feel ashamed. The opposite of power is seen as weakness, and that's where the problem lies. I think there are two issues that are important. One is when power is seen as dominance and muscular and a strong body in a particular way. Excuse me just a second. My AirPod just fell off. It automatically excludes people who are not of a particular body type, and this I explore in the body as well. Secondly, this kind of power, we interviewed an army general, a New York Times reporter, as well as a head of an NGO who wanted to shift from masculine power, which is a very narrow, dominant form of power, which excludes, to what he called feminine power. So when power is dominance, it's seen as subjugation. It's one person in control without concern about abuse of power or the negative impact on others. It has a huge, men too pay a price for this. And of course, everyone in their influence also pays a price for it because it really is subjugation. So how do we shift that? And how does power become more inclusive? So not having this narrowly defined notion of power as subjugation does not mean that you can't be powerful in a different way of power. And so the whole episode explores the negative impact of this narrowed exclusive power and other forms of power, which is power with others and power that is more shared, or what's called as feminine power. By the way, in episode 1, I raised the issue of feminine and masculine qualities, right? And whether this is a Western concept or whether this is an Indian ancient concept. And I had talked to Amish Tripathi about this. And so all of us have an internal male and a female. Every man, woman, a person, whatever gender you identify with, has an inner masculine and an inner feminine. what we've done is kill off the feminine. Or if you think about power and love, we've given men the power and assigned love to women, outsourced love to women and outsourced power to men. And this is the problem, that women have to reclaim power and men have to reclaim love, so that power and love go together. And I think that's where the blossoming, both inner and outer, comes, where we're not saying women's empowerment is to make men powerless, and we're not saying that men's power mean men have to be loveless. And it's beautifully, I use this now a lot. It was inspired by a quotation from Martin Luther King, which goes like the following: power without love is abusive. Power without love is abusive. And love without power invites abuse. The love without power invites abuse. So this, I feel, if we reframe the debate or the animosity that we have sometimes between men and women as it's a process of maturation, so that both men and women and people of all genders have both experienced, both integrate both power and love, I think we will have a society in which everyone can blossom, and we don't have leaders that use suppression and brute macho power to exclude everyone who disagrees with them.
So from your talk, at least when I was listening to the podcast, I think one statement that really hit me, and please, I hope I'm capturing it correctly, that men also feel a lot of shame if they feel they're not powerful. So I don't know, I mean, that desire to have that power is so intrinsically also associated with their self-worth. If you could comment on that, and then
Sure. No, it's a great question. I think people have we've been so enculturated to think of men and power as synonymous that people think it's biological. And this mythology that it's biological is fed into by associating power with physical strength. So if we train boys and to be manly by making fun of women and saying, don't be like a girl, or don't cry like a girl, or be a man, then there is no possibility of men thinking the opposite of power is weakness. And anything that's associated with weakness is shameful. So shame is a big part of being a man. So basically what we uncover is that often men feel alone and afraid and scared, but they're not allowed to show that, because then they would be considered weak and unmanly, right? So if you're never allowed to be weak, how can you be human? You can't show any uncertainty. And so if you always have to be in charge, that becomes a very one-sided, a very incomplete man or human being. And so the job is to reclaim the vulnerability and the willingness to say, I don't know, and I'm afraid, and still be a strong person. So that's the huge part of the learning. And I had to relearn that too, because I think when we learn, and then as women, we all learn that to show any emotions is to be weak. or to say I don't know. And so you have this meme in men, men are constantly mansplaining, right? Or constantly interrupting. And it's happening in the US. It's happening everywhere. This is not just an Indian phenomenon, by the way. It's everywhere. And that's what we need to uncover is why is it that after, now almost 80 years of, if we say it started in the 60s or 50s, after 70, 80 years of women's empowerment and shifts, the rules have shifted quite dramatically, the formal rules, but our culture and our mindsets have not. Which is why if you look at the number of CEOs or just about anything, politicians, it's still very, very imbalanced. And that's not going to change unless we understand, go into the cultural explanations, which are not just Indian, they're American, they're British. 250,000 British women get sexually harassed and molested every year. It's not by other women, it's men. Right? So we've got to make men part of this equation of coming to a new equilibrium in terms of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a person of whatever gender you identify with. Let me say one more thing about shame, which is different from guilt, is when you're shamed, and India, by the way, this is old concept, is a shame culture. We socialize kids by shaming them. Auntie kya kahenge? Kya kar rahe ho? Auntie kya kahenge? Uncle kya kahenge? Papa kya kahenge? Right? We don't explain why this behavior is not appropriate. We socialize kids into behaving well by shaming them. So if this can change, in schools, you go, I don't know if they do this anymore, but you shame a boy in the class. And we got this actually from a lot of the boys that we interviewed on how they are socialized to be boys and not to talk to girls in schools by shaming. So of course, but when you shame someone, does the behavior change? No, it goes underground. You hide it. And shame, from talking to psychologists, is the most difficult emotion to deal with because it gets buried so deep, it's very difficult to even unearth because shame is associated with you. I'm a bad person, not the behavior is bad. And that's why it's difficult to entangle, and shame is really poisonous.
So, there's a great synergy between all your podcast and everything. They're flowing to each other, kind of. That's the beauty of them. And while listening to that, when you were talking about men and emotions and everything, the role model that most boys have, and also that we just heard in that in the recording earlier, is their fathers. Okay, that's where they come from. And as they're seeing their fathers go through that emotion, lack of emotions, let's say, or show their emotions in negative way, or as anger and everything, how do we change that? Because that is having a very deep impact on them, learning from the previous generation. So what is your take on that?
I think the more models there are, the more it helps, but even just having a conversation. So the tagline for our podcast is have a conversation and listen deeply. Just the freedom to be able to express the emotion and not be shamed for it is important. But what we've also seen, and the research supports this, is when men start doing this, so a man crying or a father crying, women get very uncomfortable. The mother goes into deep distress and everyone wants to hush it down. So intellectually, we know that we should let men cry. But when it's actually happening to the man we love or to the father and the kids are all around, mothers hush up the father. And a lot of this men's emotions happens behind closed doors. So the children never see it. right? Because why? Because men are supposed to be strong. So we want the men to change, but when they start changing, we get uncomfortable. I think that's also happening. So again, it's modeling, it's practice. It literally is training and practice. I've had to change tremendously, and it's just practicing a different behavior. And let me tell you that it's much easier to change when you do it in the company of others, because then you can support each other and you know you're not alone. Part of the mythology, part of the deep mythology with women as well as men is that I'm the only one who's like this. So men told us things they've never told anyone before, not even their wives, because they feel they won't be understood. So it all starts with having a conversation, and having a conversation just like you're doing now, having your feelings about the conversation, but not interrupting whoever is speaking, and just listening.
That's so well said. And this just reminds me that women are often, we often hear "log kya kahenge" wala phrase.
Exactly.
I think men also hear that. Boys are also, we are also using that for them. "Log kya kahenge." Mothers are hushing their kids just because of that.
Right.
"Ki log kya kahenge,"
Yeah.
crying like a girl
Yeah.
and all that stuff. That's very
Right.
So let's move on to some audience question, because we can see a lot of conversation happening in the chat box, and I think people really want to ask you. So,
May I just say one thing?
Yes.
If you're uncomfortable, if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's great. So notice your discomfort, and hold it rather than discharging by jumping into your head and asking a question. So it's through being uncomfortable. I mean, the common phrase, we have to step outside our comfort zone to change. That's equally true for me as it is for you, in whatever sphere of life you want to change. But it's much easier when you come up with behavioral contracts with others. And that's why I believe very strongly that working in groups, whether it's within the family, having a family discussion and setting up rules. And it's often children, young people who are going to change the adults, because the older you get, the more set you are in your ways. Sorry for that interruption. Please go ahead.
That's actually the correct way of putting it. The older you are, we need to start young. Yeah. So, Sushmita, please go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I had a question, ma'am. I am sorry, I would confess that I haven't heard your podcast yet, but I will do so. But I had a question asking, uh, having you said that everyone has the right to be heard, we have often heard that when a male author, talks about or expresses or writes about a woman, he is not doing proper justice to the characters or to the woman clan in general. So, what would be your take if I ask you that if a woman takes up writing about a man, or if a woman takes up talking about a man in a public or in the society that we live in, keeping in mind both Eastern and Western, do you think women can do justice to men clan by
Men?
talking about them?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think men, this is not going to be popular. I think men can. I think anyone should be able to write about anyone. And it's up to the readers to make judgments. I would say why I feel confident about talking about men, and I'll only talk about myself, is because I've done the research. I've listened to, it's not my experience, it's not my theorizing about men, just in the same way I did about poverty. I'm not poor, but I've spent a lifetime living with poor people and talking to poor people, and I think I'm a good representative of their voices. It's through my twists and turns. And in the same way, what I'm talking about men and their experiences is not based on my imagination, but deep listening for a year or almost 2 years to men. I started it in 2013, where we interviewed about 50 men, and then put it aside because women's stories were very complex and it was just too much to put into one book. So so then after that book, I got hundreds of emails saying, okay, how do we change? Which then led to another year of work and creation of something called Chup Circles, which is conversation and courage. And I really wanted to do that for men as well, and decided I needed to first do the research. And so this process is doing the research and listening to 250 men. Do I have it all right? I don't know. That's up to men to come back and talk to. So I feel comfortable talking about men's experiences as I've learned from these interviews? Yes. Will this be the truth forever? No. Is there more to learn? Absolutely.
Dharmika, please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, ma'am. Thank you for today's session. It was extremely informative. Earlier, I was completely clueless about the same, but now the concepts have edged on my mind. Ma'am, I don't have a question, but I just want to add something. I want to present my own opinion. I think patriarchy already faces a plethora of challenges. Society doesn't leave any option for them. It's like an eligible man should earn a handsome salary. Society perceives men with a good bank balance. Of course, it's a total injustice to them. We talk about women empowerment, but I don't think we talk about men empowerment. So both are necessary.
Okay.
It is often said that boys should not cry like girls. They are not weak and docile, but they are not like that. They are not built with the strong mindsets. Human beings have emotions. Doesn't matter about a boy or girl. Patriarchy has been conditioned to behave in such manner. And few more lines. I won't take much time. They are conditioned to do so, and I saw many movies where men and women are exchanging their roles, like the movie entitled Key and Ka, where Arjun Kapoor was endorsing a cooking oil brand and Kareena Kapoor was the breadwinner of her family. I think we all need to escape out of the mental slavery where sometimes women poses the threat to the patriarchy. It's all about mindsets, stigmas, and taboos related to men. I think women can earn, they are financially independent. So here what I feel about men and women, both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. I think on the particularly, if I was to summarize, what is killing men? And I mean literally, what is killing men off? I think the single most important killer is what you just spoke about, Dharmika, is this pressure to provide. And this pressure to provide or be the income earner is not just for your basics, but the pressure to compete and be the most outstanding man, to provide not just the basics, but for the luxuries, and it keeps escalating, is a huge pressure on men. And it starts very early. Again, in the socialization of boys, I was surprised that 7 and 8-year-old boys were talking about when we said, when did you realize that you would have to provide for the family? And they were talking about 7 and 8. So this pressure to know that you have to study, you have to do this, you have to do that. And keep in mind, I'm talking about the educated middle and upper classes, is very intense. And so they lose degrees of freedom as well on that. So yes, the challenge, but what comes out is that even where women are earning, unless women are earning, become the primary earners, that this, even in two income families, men still feel that they have to be the primary earners. So that psychological pressure has not been lifted in at least the families that we interviewed and the men that we interviewed who spoke about their colleagues. And even though the other thing that comes up is, even though women are obviously more educated and earning when they're young, when the children come, it's usually women who quit their job or do other jobs that feed their passion but don't bring in the income that's required to sustain the standard of living that they want.
Moksha, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Greetings to everybody present here. I wanted to talk about how every aspect, or every situation. Okay, suppose I'm a woman. Okay, so if I'm talking about the struggles that I face from the society, there is always somebody who will come up and say ki to kya hua, you don't know what we men have to go through, and all of that. So it becomes very situation specific, and it sort of deviates from the issues of women. And I feel ki men always raise their issues only when a woman is talking about her struggles. So I think what do you have to say about why there are not many men coming forward and talking about their struggles? It is always very situation specific, and it is always, most of the times, okay, I won't say always, most of the times it is when women are talking about their problems and their issues. And also the fact that as a woman, when you conduct these podcasts and when you talk to people, do you face any backlash in the sense with respect to why are you talking about it, or you alone cannot change the society? Because I am a content writer and I write about these things more often. So I always get comments, or people coming up to me and saying that tum akeli kya kar logi, and you are a woman and you are a girl, and why are you talking about men issues? So I always have this reply, then being a man, why are you not talking about it? Ki, why do you have to always come up only when a woman is talking about herself, or when a woman is talking about men's struggles? Why don't you initiate that talk?
Mm-hmm. Right. There are a lot of questions and a lot of important things you've said. On the first one is men starting to talk about their issues when a woman raises her things. It's just a pure defense, right? You then get into a competition of who's a bigger victim. And you can't win that. And you don't want to win that. So you have to step aside. I don't mean physically step aside, but psychologically step aside and don't get into arguments there. I think the second thing is that men are under a lot of pressure, and because they're supposed to be strong, they don't have spaces. That's what comes up constantly in the interviews we did, and from talking to other men, young men who've started men's groups, that men don't have safe places where they can talk. And secondly, I think women and men we don't know how to talk to each other without attacking each other. So I think we all need to learn new skills. And I think the third is that you have to continue being strong and doing what you need to do and develop a circle of support around you, because society is still very unequal and it's in the process of change. So it's both. So the only way not to have a backlash is to continue focusing on giving more opportunities to girls for education, etc., till it equalizes, and including men in the conversation. We've got to include men in the conversation, not because they're right, not because they haven't done wrong things, but to correct those wrong things and to give them a possibility of breaking out of the pretense. Lots of men and even boys, 14-year-old, the one that made me cry was this 14-year-old who was saying that I'm an actor. A 14-year-old boy says, I'm an actor. I'm constantly pretending to be like this and like that because that's what society and that's what my family expects me to be. So we asked him, how does that feel? This is one of my team members who did the interview. And he said, wrong. I feel wrong inside. So obviously not all men are alike, not all women are alike, but there are men who want to change. There are men who feel suffocated in their role, and they need to be held accountable. I think the last thing I want to say is on this business of emotions. We talk a lot about men, boys not being able to cry. I think there's another piece in the emotion that's really important. We tolerate anger from men and boys. We tolerate anger from men and boys because that unconsciously in our minds is manly. But we don't tolerate tears or depression. That's considered a breakdown or weakness. Even I hadn't seen that so clearly till I started doing this research. And that's why it's so interesting and enlivening for me, because I learned so much and clarify. So if we can shift this, if we can tolerate men being depressed or a boy being quiet, then we start to shift without lecturing. And this is not easy, but it can be easier by just opening up the conversations and having spaces to have the conversations. And most powerful, I think men need their own groups, women need their own groups. But some of the richest conversations are when men and women are together.
That is nice. And we know that, it has been 1 hour already, but we would like to take one final question, if that's fine, ma'am. Deepa, ma'am, is that fine if we take one more question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Chandan, please go ahead. You had a question.
Okay, very short one. Deepa ji, I really liked your idea of one behavior that you picked up, and where you said that whenever I see women being put down, I'll chip in. And as a man who's also struggling with his own conditioning, I was just curious, what are those 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would like to say to men as to how they can be allies, and what are those 1 or 2 micro behaviors that that sort of caught your attention, and you would like to talk about it.
Beautiful. Thank you for the question. I think the first one is listening. I think actually women may be better listeners sometimes, but we're not good listeners because we keep thinking about how we're going to respond, how we're going to defend ourselves. So I think one way of breaking this is by just listening and not responding to whatever, good, bad, whatever is being said. And to remember that listening and being quiet does not mean agreement necessarily, especially in intimate relations in families. Just listening and pausing, I think, is very, very important. It's very simple, but it's actually very difficult. When I'm upset, I'm not a good listener, right? So if you're upset and you can still listen without being defensive, I think that's a huge gift. So listen normally and listen when you're angry. The second thing, I think, for men particularly, is connect with your hurt and disappointment. Connect with your hurt and disappointment. They're actually 2 different things. Instead, what happens is because men are trained not to be, again, just to be strong, you're not allowed to be, quotes within, weak, right? So they lash out, and the only response they're allowed really is anger.
Thank you, Deepa. That was very eye-opening. I mean, I listened to all of the podcasts, and they're even more eye-opening. I think some of the words that really kind of, like I said, the one about shame, the body issues. I think a lot of things that maybe I just did not think about because in my framework, I'm only thinking about women and that women are facing these issues. And it was very encompassing to understand what the other side is probably feeling. I think a couple of things I took away from the session is the listening without judgment. And I think that's very, very hard because putting these stereotypes out of our head and really being open is very tough. And it was very tough for me because as I was also going through the podcast, I was like, no, this can't be, So I think that whole concept that you have, that listening without judgment, I think the second thing that you said, the one thing that we all can do, that we could possibly take up, maybe it's just a small step, but that kind of says, okay, we can make that positive change. And the third thing is understand our own reactions, the way that we are actually reacting, and maybe think a little bit more before we also react. I would like to hear your closing thoughts before we end for the day.
Yeah. I think my closing thoughts are exactly, someone said in this, society screws us all. I think that's true. And I think I think it's important to humanize men. I think that's really, really important, but it's also equally important to hold bad behavior accountable, right? So come back to love and power. So I'm not saying love men only. You have to own your power, and men have to sort of go more into love, because that's what ironed out of them. So it is, how can we hold ourselves and men accountable? So I'm not saying it's okay to sexually harass. I'm not saying it's okay to rape. All these behaviors are clearly non-negotiables. All the other behavior that we're doing that results in this kind of behavior is what I'm saying we need to handle with. Let's get to the roots of some of these behaviors that result in this deep inequality, as well as all the wrongdoing that happens. Because the reality is that men are killing each other at much higher rates than they're killing women. But why should they be killing at all? That's really the issue, is how can we get to the root of the problem so that unhappiness and lack of fulfillment, or whatever simple words you want to use, can be pulled out, so that there's more space for men to be the kind of men they want to be without being shamed.
That's so great, and thank you so much for that, ma'am. That this 1 hour just passed by, and we wanted to hear so much more, and there were so many questions and comments that are coming in, and we wish we had time to address everything. But thank you for that 1 hour, and this helps us understand what it means to be a man and how we are also a part of that conversation. We women also need to be a part of that conversation as well.
And that we're all masculine and feminine. Yes. We have all those qualities within us. Thank you so much. I will never be the expert on men, but I can do research on men and women and people of all genders. And I hope this will inspire men as well to do research on themselves and start conversation groups amongst themselves. Thank you.
And with that note, we would love to bring you back again on the platform, because I think people want to hear a lot more. So let's look forward to that.
Lots to discuss.
Yes.
Okay. Take care. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining in. And we wish you all good night. And please, once again, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thanks. Wow, look at that. Beautiful.